Welcome to the world of Carry On. In this series, we're going to take a look behind the scenes at how some of the greatest Carry On films were ever made. In this episode, we look at the 12th Carry On film and the last to be made by Anglo-amalgamated, Carry On Screaming. But who was to provide the laughs and the screams? Harry H. Corbett as Detective Sergeant Sidney Bung. Kenneth Williams as Dr. Orlando Watt. Jim Dowell as Albert Potter. Giles Hawtrey as Dan Dan. Fenella Fielding as Valeria Watt. Joan Sims as Emily Bung. And Angela Douglas as Doris Mann. Carry On Screaming went into production on the 10th of January 1966. And although that the title role of Detective Sergeant Sidney Bung was written with Sid James in mind, Sid was unfortunately in pantomime with Babes in the Wood at the London Palladium, which ran until the June of '66. In September of 1965, producer Peter Rogers was already considering alternative casting for the lead role. And although Sid was all very well established within the series, Peter Rogers had an idea that Harry H. Corbett could be a suitable replacement. Peter Rogers wrote to Harry H. Corbett, "Will you please consider the part of Sid Bung? I enclosed the script. I've always wanted to make a film with you, and I am keeping my fingers crossed this time." Now, having been offered the highest acting wage so far in the series of £12,000 for 6 weeks' work, the actor accepted and took on the role of Sergeant Sidney Bung. With the film being set in the early 1900s, wasn't going to be easy. So on the 11th of November 65, Gerald Thomas wrote to Lord Montague of Burley Abbey, asking him to provide 3 cars from the early 1900s for location in the studios. Lord Montague duly obliged, providing the required vehicles and 2 mechanics. Norman Mitchell was cast as the Burley cab driver and wrote to Peter Rogers to say that it was rather splendid to be entrusted with driving a car of 1910. I am only sorry that there were no chase sequences. American situation comedies at the time, such as The Munsters and The Addams Family, were proving to be quite popular on British TV as well as in the USA. And Bernard Bresslaw was playing the undead butler of Socket and not had seen either of these series at the time of filming. Now, The Addams Family had debuted on British television in October of '65, and much of the crew had taken to it and referred to Bresslaw as being Lurch on the set. Of course, Bernard had no idea of what they were talking about and had to take it upon himself to reacquaint himself with an episode of The Addams Family to try and get the sense of what they were actually trying to say. He got the joke eventually. A rarity occurred within the script of Carry On Screaming, something that was unheard of in Carry On history. In the original script, Orlando Watt was written as Valeria's father, and Kenneth Williams made a request to change it. He wanted to say that he wanted to play someone of his own age. At the time, he was 39 years old. So that Orlando and Valeria are brother and sister, rather than look like their father and daughter. In the finished version, Kenneth Williams got his own way and was subsequently changed. Giles Hawtrey was added to the cast at the 11th hour, after American distributors specifically requested him to be in the film. As he was such a bit of a crowd pleaser and the audiences there loved him, his role of Dan Dan was originally given to Sidney Bromley. Rather than have upset with the American market, Bromley was dropped and Hawtrey stepped in. It therefore gives Hawtrey a bit of a carry-on record, to be the only carry-on actor to have a leading credit in a carry-on for less than 5 minutes screen time. So without further ado, let's take a look at what the film was all about. The film opens with some screams coming from Hokum Woods, where Doris Mann and Albert Potter are courting. When Albert searches for the woods for the peeping Tom, Doris is abducted by the monster named Oddbod, which leaves a finger behind. Albert, finding the finger, rushes to the police station and reports the matter to Detective Sergeant Sidney Bung and his humble assistant, Constable Slowbottom, who have already been investigating some disappearances within the woods. After searching the woods for further clues, the group stumble across the eerie Bide-A-Wee rest home and are shown to the sitting room by the butler, Socket. Socket informs the mistress of the house, the seductive Valeria, of their presence, and she then wakes her electrically charged brother, Dr. Orlando Watt. Now, Dr. Watt speaks to the three men, who are frightened from the house when Dr. Watt vanishes and reappears from the electrical charge after being plugged into the wall socket. The next day, Bung, Slowbottom and Potter interview Dan Dan, a lavatory attendant who once worked at Bide-A-Wee as a gardener. But Dan is silenced by Oddbod before he can reveal anything. Meanwhile, scientist at the police station, John Pertwee, accidentally creates a second creature, Oddbod Jr., subjecting Oddbod's finger to an electrical charge. The next day, Potter discovers Doris in mannequin form in a shop, but no proof can be found whether this is really Doris or not. Bung returns to the house and discovers evidence that links Valeria and Orlando to Doris, but remains oblivious to it all. In order not to be detected, Valeria and Watt use a potion to turn Bung into Mr. Hyde and get him to steal the mannequin back from the shop. Bung and Slowbottom then decide to set a trap in Hokum Woods, with Slowbottom disguised as a woman for bait. Meanwhile, following close behind is Sergeant Bung's wife, Emily, who thinks that Bung is having an affair. She is later caught by Oddbod Jr., while Slowbottom is captured by Oddbod. Bung, now teamed up with Potter, makes their way to the house after following some footprints. The two decide, whilst they're at the house, to stay the night, and whilst a fouled plot to dispose of Bung and Potter with a snake, the Oddbods are dispatched to deal with them. Bung and Potter are reunited, of course with Slowbottom, and manage to turn Doris into human form, but discover that Emily has been turned into a mannequin. A battle follows in which Albert, in Mr. Hyde form, defeats the Oddbods, and Dr. Watt threatens them with purifying liquid to bring his old mummy to life, Rubber-Tee-Tee, which comes alive eventually by a lightning strike. Following that, Rubber-Tee-Tee decides to have a pop at Dr. Watt, and they both fall into the vat in the cellar, killing them both, but not before Dr. Watt says the infamous words of "Frying tonight!" Albert and Doris are reunited and marry some time later, only to discover that when they visit Sergeant Detective Bung, his home lacks electricity and is unable to return his wife to human form. However, he doesn't seem too bothered, as he's now shacked up with Valeria. And that brings us to this horrifying end of this film. The film was released on the 16th of August of 1966, and the last to be produced under the Anglo-Amalgamated banner, which we'll discuss in a later programme. Carry On Screaming is regarded as being one of the best Carry On films out there, up there with maybe Carry On Up the Khyber and Carry On Camping maybe. But people do regard this as being one of the finest achievements. Now, this is probably because it takes the Carry On humour and the level of the actual situation to a new level. I mean, taking on the world of Hammer horror with all the makeup and all the lovely grandeur of the Edwardian period really does bring the film alive, and it really does have a sense of black comedy. But some would disagree with that. A lot of fans don't like the film, evidently because Sid James is not in the actual film. But some feel that Harry H. Colbert should have been in more after this, as he really did settle in well with the team, and he really did make an impact on the Carry-Ons. But however you feel about Carry On Screaming, you can't really go wrong with this film. It's basically perfect from start to end, and it has everything a Carry On needs. So whether you love it or you hate it, you've got to carry on screaming with laughter, because this film provides more than that. Until next time, carry on laughing.